I'm Leo, I'm 31 years old, and my entire family tried to kick me out of my own home, calling me a worthless freeloader. Before I tell you about the phone call that made their jaws hit the floor and changed everything forever, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. It all came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon, a day that started with the oppressive quiet that had become the norm in our house. The air in the living room was thick, heavy with years of unspoken resentment that had finally boiled over. My brother, Scott, stood in the middle of the room, his chest puffed out, radiating an arrogance that had been nurtured by my parents since birth. His wife, Jenna, was positioned slightly behind him, a perfect porcelain doll of feigned sympathy, her eyes holding a glint of triumph. And my parents, my own mother and father, sat rigidly on the sofa, their faces a mural of cold, hard disappointment directed squarely at me. "We're gonna live in this house," Scott announced, his voice booming as if addressing a crowd, not his brother. He gestured expansively around the living room, a space I had silently paid the property taxes on for the last decade, a space where I had written novels that kept a roof over all our heads. "You jobless bum." The words were meant to be daggers, and while they pricked, they no longer pierced. I had built up a callus against their particular brand of venom. For years, my reality was a canvas they painted with their own delusions. My job, the one that had me grinding out 10 to 12-hour days from my home office, wasn't a real job in their world. It was a hobby, a childish fantasy, just Leo playing on his computer. My eyes flickered to my parents, a final, futile search for an ally. I was pleading with them silently to step in, to be the parents from sitcoms, the ones who defended their children. But the faces staring back were alien, set in the stone of their own narrative. "Why can't you just do as you're told for once?" my mother, Helen, said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Scott needs a proper place to start a family. You're not doing anything with your life. You're an ungrateful man. Get out." My father, Richard, ever her echo, just nodded his solemn agreement. His arms crossed over his chest like a judge who had already passed sentence. "Your brother's right. It's time you stood on your own 2 feet. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I was the only person in the room standing on my own 2 feet, and they were trying to chop them off at the knees. But in their skewed vision, I was the failure. Scott was the golden child, the one with the real job, the perfect wife, the bright future. I was the strange, quiet son who was a permanent fixture in his childhood bedroom. A strange calm washed over me, quenching the fire of anger and hurt. The years of frustration solidified into a cold, clear resolve. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but they had drawn the line in the sand, and now I was going to step over it. "Okay," I said, my voice unnervingly even. "If that's how you feel, I'll leave." Scott's lips curled into a smirk. Jenna's face relaxed into a smile of pure, smug satisfaction. My parents visibly sagged with relief. They thought they had won. They envisioned me packing a duffel bag and slinking away into the night. But then, I pulled out my phone. I didn't look at them. I scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over a name they would never recognize, and pressed the call button. The phone rang once, twice, and then a calm, professional voice answered. "Hello, it's me," I said, my voice steady. "It's time. Please send the car." I hung up. Scott snorted a laugh. "Who'd you call? A buddy to help you cry on his shoulder?" I didn't answer. I just stood there waiting. Less than 10 minutes later, a sleek, black sedan, the kind that whispers of money and power, pulled up silently to the curb. A man in a perfectly tailored dark suit emerged. He walked up the path, his polished shoes clicking on the concrete, and knocked softly on the open door. He looked past my stunned family, his eyes finding mine. "Sorry to keep you waiting, sir." And just like that, the world my family thought they knew was about to shatter into a million pieces. But to understand how we got here, we have to go back. Back to the beginning of the end. A year earlier, life was defined by a quiet, predictable rhythm. I lived in my childhood home, a fact my family used as a constant low-grade accusation. I worked remotely from my upstairs bedroom, a career they chose to misinterpret as unemployment. In their eyes, I was Leo, the 30-year-old son who had failed to launch. The truth, a secret I guarded like a dragon's hoard, was that I was the one keeping the house from falling apart. The mortgage had been paid off by my grandfather's foresight, but the recurring bleed of property taxes, insurance, utilities, and endless repairs fell to me. Every month, I would initiate a quiet transfer from my earnings, a silent subsidy to their lifestyle. They never questioned the magic that kept the lights on. They just assumed it was their right. My substantial salary was my shield, the hidden foundation of my independence within those stifling walls. The family dynamic was a textbook case of golden child syndrome. Scott, my older brother, was the sun, and my parents were hapless planets caught in his gravitational pull. He had a flashy sales job that involved more talk than substance, a new car every 2 years, and now a new wife, Jenna, who was the final, perfect accessory. They were the walking, talking embodiment of my parents' shallow aspirations. I remember a specific Thanksgiving, just after Scott and Jenna got married. It was a masterclass in the family's dysfunction. Scott arrived with Jenna, bearing a ridiculously expensive bottle of wine. "For the best parents in the world," he announced, presenting it to my father with a flourish. "Oh, Scott, you shouldn't have," my mother gushed, while my father clapped him on the back. I had spent 2 days preparing a special dessert, a complicated pumpkin cheesecake with a ginger snap crust that I knew was my mother's favorite. I brought it out, and my mother glanced at it. "Oh, that's nice, Leo. Put it on the counter." Later, as we sat down to dinner, Jenna held the room captive. She was beautiful, effervescent, and an expert at flattery. "Oh, Helen, this turkey is divine," she exclaimed. "You simply must teach me your secrets." My mother beamed. "Anything for you, dear." Scott, basking in the reflected glory, caught my eye across the table. He gave me that familiar look, a cocktail of pity and contempt. "Leo's been holed up in his room again," he said to Jenna, his voice carrying across the table, "working on his little computer projects, probably writing fan fiction." The table chuckled. "Oh, that's nice," Jenna said, her smile a little too bright. "It's so important to have hobbies." I focused on cutting my turkey, my jaw tight. Arguing was a fool's errand. It was like trying to teach physics to a cat. My work wasn't a hobby. My little computer projects were carefully constructed worlds, intricate plots, and characters that were more real to me than the people at this table. Those projects had bought the very turkey they were so eagerly devouring. The moment that truly defined the evening came during dessert. My mother cut a huge slice of a store-bought apple pie that Scott had brought. She completely forgot about my cheesecake. I watched as everyone ate, praising Scott's excellent taste in bakeries. I sat there, a slice of my own creation untouched in front of me. It was a small thing, a forgotten dessert, but it was everything. It was a perfect metaphor for my place in the family. Later, as I was clearing the dishes, alone in the kitchen, I overheard them in the living room. "He's just so stuck," my mother whispered, the sound carrying easily. 30 years old, and he's never even had a serious girlfriend. What are we going to do with him?" "He'll figure it out," my father replied, his tone laced with resignation. "Thank God for Scott. He's the one who will carry on the family name with pride. He'll make sure you're taken care of." I closed my eyes, the clatter of plates in the sink the only sound in my world. The words were a familiar poison, a slow-acting toxin I had been absorbing my whole life. I paid for their comfort. I maintained their home. I existed in the background, the silent, reliable stagehand in the grand production of Scott's magnificent life. I didn't know it then, but Jenna's arrival wasn't just adding a new actress to the play. She was about to rewrite the entire script, and I was being cast as the villain. Jenna's presence in the house escalated quickly. What started as weekend visits with Scott soon morphed into solo drop-ins during the week, always with a flimsy excuse. She'd bring by a half-eaten box of donuts or a gossip magazine for my mom, her true purpose being to infiltrate the territory. Her new favorite project, it seemed, was me. She'd lean against my office doorframe, a posture of casual intrusion, and fire off suggestions wrapped in the gauze of concern. "You work too hard, Leo," she'd say with a cheerful, tinkling laugh. "A handsome guy like you shouldn't be a hermit. We need to get you out on the town." Her words were like expertly crafted insults disguised as compliments. Every piece of advice was a subtle dig at my current state. She wasn't trying to help me. She was trying to highlight my perceived deficiencies to solidify her own status as the perfect, caring daughter-in-law. One Tuesday afternoon, she waltzed in with 2 mugs of tea. "I thought you might need a break from all that typing," she said, setting one on my desk, perilously close to a stack of research notes for my next novel. "Thanks, Jenna, but I'm really in the zone right now," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "I'm on a tight deadline." She waved a dismissive, perfectly manicured hand. "Oh, that computer stuff can wait 5 minutes. Let's talk about your image. I saw a fantastic sale at Nordstrom. We could go this weekend. Get you some clothes that scream successful professional instead of, well, you know." She gestured vaguely at my comfortable work-from-home attire. It was relentless. I felt like a specimen in her personal social experiment. The worst part was how my parents lapped it up, seeing her intrusions as a sign of her benevolent nature. "Jenna has such a good heart," my mother would sigh contentedly after she left. "She's the daughter I never had. She's so worried about you, Leo." That night I called my best friend, Mark. He was the only person who knew the truth about my career, my sole confidant in a world of deception. "Dude, she's a classic narcissist," Mark said after I finished my rant. "She's not being nice. She's asserting dominance. She's marking her territory, and right now you're just a piece of furniture in it." "I know," I groaned, leaning my head back against the wall. "But if I say anything, I become the bad guy. I'm the ungrateful recluse who can't appreciate her kindness. You know, for a guy who writes such complex, manipulative villains, you're terrible at spotting them in your own life," he said, a familiar joke between us. "The villains in my books have clear motivations," I shot back. "They want to take over the world or find a magical artifact. Jenna just seems to want to rearrange my sock drawer and critique my social life. It's not diabolical, it's just irritatingly petty." "That's how it starts, man." Mark's voice turned serious. "It starts with the sock drawer. Then it's your schedule. Then it's your confidence. People like that, they see someone who's quiet and they assume they're weak. They'll push and push until they find a boundary. You need to build a wall, and you need to build it now." I knew he was right, but setting a boundary in my family was like trying to build a dam with handfuls of sand. The moment you turned your back, the tide of their collective delusion would wash it all away. Jenna's campaign of microaggressions continued. She started helping with my laundry, and my favorite wool sweater came back 2 sizes too small. She'd tidy my bookshelf, rearranging my meticulously organized research books into a chaotic mess based on color. Each action was small, deniable, but it was a clear message. Nothing of yours is safe from me. I am in control here. I retreated further into my work, my room becoming less of an office and more of a fortress. I started locking the door, but I was about to find out that no lock was strong enough to keep out an enemy who had already been welcomed inside. The tipping point, the moment the Cold War turned hot, came on a Thursday. I was downstairs in the kitchen, making a sandwich, when Jenna arrived, unannounced as usual, letting herself in the front door. "Oh, good, you're here," she said, her voice bright and brittle. "Your mom was just telling me how your room has gotten a bit cluttered. I have a free hour, so I thought I'd help you tidy up a bit." Before I could even form a protest, she was already breezing past me and heading up the stairs. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. A cold dread washed over me. My office was my sanctuary. It was the one place on earth that was completely mine. It was organized chaos, yes, but it was my chaos. It was where I built worlds, where my characters spoke to me, where my entire professional life existed. The thought of her in there, her hands on my things, her judgment seeping into the very air, it felt like a physical violation. I dropped the knife on the counter and followed her, my half-made sandwich forgotten. By the time I reached my room, She was already inside, her hands on her hips, surveying the space with the critical eye of a health inspector. "See? This is what I'm talking about," she said, gesturing to my desk, which was covered in notebooks, reference books, and manuscript pages. "A clear space makes for a clear mind, Leo. How can you get any work done in this mess?" She didn't wait for an answer. She started moving things, picking up a stack of papers here, a book there, tootling under her breath. Then her eyes landed on my dresser. On it was my collection of colognes and a leather valet tray where I kept my watch, keys, and wallet when I was home. "Wow," she said, her tone shifting from condescending to covetous. She picked up a bottle of expensive cologne, a brand she clearly recognized. I didn't expect someone who just stays at home all day to use stuff this nice. Without asking, she opened my top dresser drawer. "And look at these shirts. This brand is way too expensive for me and Scott. You must be dipping into your savings." A cold fury, sharp and pure, rose in my throat. "Jenna, please get out of my drawers and stop going through my things." She looked up, her face a perfect mask of innocence. "Oh, silly, I'm not. I'm just trying to help you organize. You have all this great stuff. You should show it off more." She was a tornado of false helpfulness, leaving a trail of disarray in her wake. After a few more excruciating minutes of her tidying, she finally declared the room much better and swept out, humming to herself. She left me standing in the middle of my desecrated sanctuary. It took me a full hour to put everything back the way it was, to restore my sense of order. As I was placing my belongings back in the valet tray, my stomach clenched and dropped. My watch was gone. It wasn't just any watch. It was a vintage 1960s Omega Seamaster, a gift from my late grandfather for my college graduation. It was my most prized possession, the one tangible link to the only male role model who had ever seen my potential, who had encouraged my writing. His inheritance had been my seed money, the foundation of my career, but the watch was his vote of confidence. It was a symbol of his belief in me. I tore the room apart. I checked my desk, every drawer under the bed, in my closet. I even checked the pockets of yesterday's pants. It was gone, and I knew, with a sickening, gut-wrenching certainty, who had taken it. She must have palmed it while she was organizing my dresser, while I was distracted by her sheer audacity. There was no proof. If I accused her, it would be my word against the family's darling angel. They would tear me to shreds. They'd call me crazy, paranoid, jealous. I could already hear my mother's voice. "Leo, how could you accuse that sweet girl of such a thing?" That night, sleep was impossible. I sat in the dark, the empty space on my wrist a burning reminder of the violation. Mark's words echoed in my head. "They'll push and push until they find a boundary." Jenna hadn't just found my boundary. She had taken a sledgehammer to it. The quiet life I had so carefully constructed was an illusion. The war had been declared, and I was losing badly because I hadn't even realized I was in a fight. Sitting there, surrounded by the shadows, a plan began to form. A cold, clear, and absolutely necessary plan. The next morning, I went online and ordered the smallest, highest resolution hidden camera I could find, with overnight shipping. She had invaded my world. Now I was going to watch her every move in it. The camera arrived the next afternoon in a discreet brown box. It was a marvel of technology, a tiny black cube no bigger than a sugar cube with a wide-angle lens. I spent an hour experimenting, finding the perfect hiding spot. I finally settled on tucking it into the spine of a thick, rarely used encyclopedia on a high shelf. The vantage point was perfect. It had a clear, unobstructed view of my entire room, with a particular focus on the dresser and my desk, the two areas she seemed most interested in. I connected it to a secure app on my phone, tested the feed, and felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The trap was set. I didn't have to wait long. Predictability was one of my family's defining traits. The following Monday, right on schedule, Jenna's car pulled into the driveway. She came bearing a lemon meringue pie, my father's favorite. My mom, of course, was ecstatic. "Leo, Jenna's here with pie," she called up the stairs, as if announcing the arrival of royalty. I took a deep breath, stealing myself. I had to play my part perfectly. I went downstairs, forced a smile, and thanked her for the pie. We made awkward small talk for a few minutes. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a silent, vibrating alarm I had set. "Oh, shoot," I said, looking at my phone screen with an expression of feigned urgency. "That's my editor. It's our weekly conference call. I have to take this." I made sure to use the word editor loudly and clearly, planting another seed of a reality they couldn't comprehend. Jenna's eyes lit up with a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Was it curiosity or contempt? "Oh, of course. Don't let us keep you from your work," she said, the slight pause before the last word dripping with condescension. I hurried upstairs, closing my office door firmly behind me. But instead of joining a call, I killed the lights, sat on the floor in the corner just out of the camera's line of sight, and opened the live feed on my phone. My heart was pounding. This was it. For what felt like an eternity, nothing happened. Then, the doorknob turned with agonizing slowness. The door creaked open, and Jenna slipped inside, closing it softly behind her. She stood perfectly still for a moment, listening, her head cocked like a predator sensing its environment. Then, apparently convinced she was alone, she went to work. It was terrifying to watch. This wasn't a clumsy, opportunistic act. This was practiced. She moved with a quiet, fluid efficiency that spoke of experience. She didn't rifle through things randomly. She was targeted. She went straight to my dresser, her eyes scanning the cologne bottles. She picked up the most expensive one, a Tom Ford fragrance I had bought myself to celebrate my last book hitting the bestseller list. Without a moment's hesitation, she slipped it into her large designer purse. Then she moved to my desk. She opened the top drawer, the one where I kept my spare checkbook, stationery, and other supplies. She ignored the emergency cash I kept there, which surprised me. Instead, she took a brand-new, leather-bound Moleskine journal I hadn't even had a chance to use yet, and a book of forever stamps. It was the sheer pettiness of it that was so enraging. This wasn't about need. This was about power. It was about taking things simply because she could, because she felt so utterly entitled to my space and my property. It was a violation born of pure, unadulterated arrogance. I watched as she gave the room one last, satisfied scan, a smug little smile playing on her lips. Then, she slipped out as quietly as she came in. My hands were shaking, not with fear, but with a potent cocktail of white-hot rage and cold, hard vindication. I stopped the recording and immediately saved the file. Then I backed it up to a secure cloud server, a separate hard drive, and sent a password-protected copy to Mark for safekeeping. I had her, dead to rights. The first major twist in this sickening family drama had been confirmed on video. The family's beloved angel was a common thief. I sat there in the dark for a long time. The image of her smug smile burned into my mind. A part of me felt a grim, triumphant satisfaction, but a much larger part of me felt a profound, hollowing sadness. This was my family. This was the woman my brother had vowed to spend his life with, the woman my parents adored as the daughter they never had. And she was stealing from me in my own home, a home I secretly paid for. The last vestiges of hope I had for them, the naive part of me that always thought things could get better, died on the floor of that dark room. I knew then that there was no fixing this with words. There was no path to reconciliation. The only way to win wasn't to play their twisted game better. It was to burn the whole game board to the ground. And I finally had the match to do it. I didn't confront her. Not yet. The video was my ace in the hole, and a good card player never shows their hand too early. For the next few days, I was a ghost. I was polite when spoken to, but I kept my interactions brief and my office door locked at all times, even when I was just stepping out to get a glass of water. My new caution was, of course, twisted into something sinister. Jenna, the master manipulator, must have spun a tale of my supposed paranoia and hostility to Scott. Because that Friday Scott came over alone, and he was on the warpath. He didn't knock on my door. He used his shoulder to shove it open, the old wood groaning in protest. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and menacing. He planted himself in the middle of my room, his arms crossed, trying to physically dominate the space. I swiveled in my desk chair to face him, keeping my expression neutral. "About what, Scott? About you and Jenna," he spat, his eyes blazing with self-righteous fury. "She is trying to be nice to you, trying to include you in this family, and you're treating her like she's a criminal. She told me you locked your door the second you saw her car pull up. What is wrong with you?" "My room, my door, my lock," I said simply, refusing to take the bait. His face flushed a deep, blotchy red. "Unbelievable. All you do is sit in this dark room all day, staring at a screen like a teenager. You're a goddamn freeloader. And you have the audacity to make my wife feel unwelcome in her own family's home. Neat. Not in education, employment, or training." The acronym was a weapon they had collectively chosen to wield against me. It was so dismissive, so profoundly disconnected from the reality of my life, that it was almost absurd. He saw my lack of a commute, my control over my own schedule, my absence from the corporate grind he so clearly despised, and his brain could only process it as laziness. "Jenna is a saint for putting up with your weirdness," he continued, his voice rising with every word. "She told me she's worried sick about you. She thinks you're deeply depressed. She just wants to help you. And you throw it back in her face like a spoiled brat. So that was her masterpiece. It was brilliant in a sociopathic kind of way. She wasn't just stealing my possessions. She was methodically stealing my credibility, assassinating my character with whispers and fabricated concern. She was isolating me, painting me as an unstable, paranoid villain so that when the truth eventually came out, no one would ever believe me. "Scott, you have no idea what you're talking about," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Oh, I think I do," he shot back, taking a step closer. "I'm the one with a real job, a real salary, a 401k. I'm the one building a future, supporting a family. What do you do? What do you contribute? Nothing. You are a 31-year-old man-child living off mom and dad. And it's pathetic." Every word was a calculated hammer blow, designed to shatter my self-worth. He saw my silence as an admission of guilt, my calmness as proof of my weakness. He was so thoroughly blinded by his own lifelong sense of superiority and Jenna's insidious manipulations that he couldn't see the truth that was working tirelessly just a few feet away from him. "I heard from our parents all you do is play on your computer at home every day," he sneered, his lip curling in disgust. "Well, playtime is over. We can't leave this house in the hands of a loser anymore. That's why we're taking over the household." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. This was never just about my attitude or Jenna's hurt feelings. It was about the house. It had always been about the house. They wanted it, this substantial, mortgage-free asset. And I was the only obstacle. "You should be on your knees, grateful that a woman like Jenna even gives you the time of day," he said as a parting shot. "Stop relying on her for attention. You're the reason she feels compelled to come here." He slammed the door on his way out, the vibrations rattling the books on my shelves. The accusation hung in the air, invisible but suffocating. He hadn't just insulted me. He had declared his intentions. And in doing so, he had sealed his own fate. That evening, I knew I had to make one last attempt, a final, desperate appeal to the two people who should have been my unwavering defenders. My parents. Maybe, just maybe, if they heard it directly from me, without Scott's arrogant blustering or Jenna's crocodile tears, they would see reason. It was a fool's hope, I knew, but it was a hope I had to extinguish for myself before I could move on. I found them in their usual spot, camped out in the living room, bathed in the flickering blue light of the television. I walked over and decisively turned it off. The sudden silence was a bucket of cold water, startling them out of their passive stupor. "We need to talk," I said, my voice resonating with a seriousness they weren't used to hearing from me. My mother let out a long, theatrical sigh. "Leo, if this is about you and Jenna again, I simply don't have the energy. She tries so hard with you. This is about what Scott said to me today," I clarified, deciding to start with the more immediate threat. "He came into my room. He called me a freeloader at NET. He told me that he and Jenna were taking over the household. I want to know what is going on. I watched their faces, searching for any flicker of outrage, any sign of parental instinct kicking in to protect their child. I found nothing. My father stared at the blank TV screen as if it held the secrets of the universe. My mother became intensely interested in a loose thread on a sofa cushion. "Well," my father finally said, clearing his throat, "your brother is just being proactive. If Scott wants to live here, I see no reason to object. This house is far too big for just the three of us." I stared at him, my mind reeling from the casual betrayal. "He doesn't just want to live here. He wants to kick me out. He said I had to leave." "Don't be so dramatic, Leo," my mother chided, her voice dripping with condescension. "Nobody is kicking you out. But you have to admit Scott is married now. He has responsibilities. He's thinking about the future, about a college fund for his kids one day. You don't have those concerns. And honestly, Jenna is a wonderful person. It might be fun for all of us to live together in this house." It was like talking to a brick wall. A wall that actively hated me and admired the wrecking ball that was trying to knock me down. "She is not wonderful," I said, my voice cracking with a frustration I could no longer contain. "She goes through my things. She tells lies about me to Scott. I have a very good reason to believe she is stealing from me." That got a reaction, but it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. My mother gasped, placing a hand over her heart in a gesture of pure melodrama. "Leo, how could you say such a thing? That is a vicious, horrible accusation. Jenna would never do something like that. You should be ashamed of yourself, making up stories to blame a sweet girl like that for your own paranoia." "Your mother's right," my father added, his voice turning hard and cold. "The truth is, you're just jealous of your brother's success. You're jealous he has a beautiful wife and a real life, while you hide up in that room all day long. You need to grow up and face reality." Scott's words, Jenna's narrative, all of it parroted back to me with absolute conviction. They had swallowed the poison willingly. There was no one left to appeal to. I was an island, and the tide was coming in. "So you're fine with this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You're fine with Scott treating me like dirt? You're fine with them just walking in here and taking over my life?" "It's for the best," my mother said, her tone final, as if she were discussing a closed business deal. "Scott will take care of us in our old age. He has a wife. It's time he took on the role of the man of the house." That was it, the final, fatal blow. In their world, I wasn't a man. I was a fixture, a piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness. I was a temporary placeholder until the true heir, Scott, was ready to claim his throne. I stood up. The last flicker of hope inside me didn't just die. It was brutally murdered. I looked at my parents, really looked at them, and I didn't see the people who had raised me. I saw strangers with familiar faces. I turned and walked out of the room without another word. There was nothing left to say. The conversation was over. My childhood was over. My time in that house was over. But it wasn't going to end the way they planned. It was going to end on my terms. The days that followed were filled with a strange, unnerving calm, the proverbial eye of the storm. I stopped trying to engage. I became a ghost in my own home, a silent observer moving between my room and the kitchen. They mistook my silence for surrender, my withdrawal for defeat. They didn't know I was simply gathering my ammunition. My preparation was methodical, silent, and swift. My first call was to Mr. Thompson, the family lawyer who had handled my grandfather's estate. He was semi-retired, but his mind was still a steel trap. "Thompson here," his gravelly voice answered. "Mr. Thompson, it's Leo," I said. "I need you to do something for me with the utmost discretion. Can you please courier over a certified copy of the house deed and the original, notarized transfer of ownership agreement? The one my grandfather arranged all those years ago." There was a pregnant pause on the line. "Everything all right, son?" he asked, his tone shifting from professional to concerned. He had known me since I was a boy. "Everything's fine," I lied smoothly. Just getting my personal paperwork in order. Spring cleaning, you could say. He didn't press, for which I was grateful. I'll have my assistant send it over by secure messenger tomorrow morning. It's your property, Leo. Your grandfather was a smart man. Don't you ever forget that. The second, more crucial call was to the man I publicly called my editor, but who was, in reality, much more. Mr. Arthur Davis was the senior partner at one of the biggest and most powerful literary agencies in New York. He was a shark in a Brioni suit, and he was my shark. Leo, he answered, his voice always crisp, cutting through any static. Good news on the manuscript, I hope? Almost there, Arthur, I said. But I have a different kind of problem. A family problem. And I might need to call in a favor. A very big, very public favor. I gave him the condensed version, focusing on the attempted takeover of the house, sparing him the petty details of stolen cologne. He was silent for a long moment when I finished, the kind of silence that meant he was processing, strategizing. Family can be the worst kind of business rival, he finally said, his voice cold. They know exactly where to stick the knife. What do you need, Leo? I need you here, I said, in person. And I need you to arrange for a professional moving company. I don't mean 2 guys and a truck. I mean the best. The kind that handles Picassos and priceless antiques. White glove service. Consider it done, he said without a moment's hesitation. You focus on your family drama. Let me handle the logistics. Just give me the signal. We briefly discussed my current novel, ironically a story about a family torn apart by a disputed inheritance, and he wished me luck. The final step was the video. I saved another copy to a new, encrypted thumb drive which I placed in my pocket. I then uploaded the file to a private, password-protected streaming link. Insurance. Redundancy. While my family saw me moping in my room, defeated, I was actually building an arsenal. I was lining up my generals. I was surveying the battlefield. They thought I was in retreat, but I was just taking a step back to get a running start. They were about to learn that the quietest people often have the loudest resolutions. The atmosphere in the house grew more toxic with each passing day. My family walked around with an air of smug entitlement, their victory all but declared. Scott and Jenna started spending entire afternoons at the house, no longer as guests, but as new homeowners taking measurements and planning renovations. They would stand in the living room and talk loudly, their voices deliberately pitched to carry up the stairs to my office. This whole wall should be knocked down, Jenna would declare, her voice echoing in the hall. It would create a wonderful open-concept space. And we can turn Leo's little office into a nursery one day. It gets the best morning light. A nursery. The thought was a physical blow. They were planning to create a new life in the very room where I had breathed life into countless characters. The room that had paid for the roof over their ungrateful heads. Scott, playing his part as the magnanimous new lord of the manor, would readily agree. Absolutely, babe. And we'll rip out this old carpeting. Put in some nice dark walnut hardwood floors. Dad, what do you think? A good investment, right? Whatever you kids want. My father would call back from the den. It's your house now, son. Do with it what you will. It was a campaign of psychological warfare. They weren't just pushing me out. They were trying to completely erase any trace of my existence before I had even left. I would sometimes hear my mother on the phone with her sister, Dee Carol. Her voice filled with a mix of feigned sympathy and glee. Yes, it's for the best. Leo needs a push, you know? A little tough love to get him started in the real world. I stayed in my room, my door locked, letting their words wash over me. I documented it all in a small notebook. Every cruel comment, every smug plan. Each entry was another log on the fire of my resolve. The breaking point, the moment that directly led to the opening scene of the story, came on that fateful Tuesday. I was coming down the stairs to get a glass of water, and I found all 4 of them. My mother, my father, Scott, and Jenna, waiting for me in the living room like a tribunal. It was a planned, calculated ambush. Scott stepped forward, the designated spokesman, a triumphant smirk plastered on his face. We've been talking, he began, as if this were a corporate negotiation. And we've decided it's time. Jenna and I are ready to move in next week. So, that means you have until Sunday to pack your stuff and get out. My mother nodded eagerly, like a bobblehead of betrayal. It's for the best, Leo. It's time for a change, for all of us. Jenna just stood there, looking at me with those wide, pitying eyes that I now knew were filled with nothing but contempt and deceit. That's when it all connected. Their smug planning, their loud proclamations, this final, formal eviction notice. This was the moment. The stage was set. The actors were in place. And they had just handed me my cue. This was the moment that led to my brother's arrogant declaration, my mother's cruel dismissal, and my decision to finally pick up the phone. It was time to bring down the curtain on their pathetic little play. And so we're back where we started. In the living room, the air is crackling with confusion. My family is staring at the impeccably dressed man in the doorway, their brains struggling to process this new, unexpected variable. Mr. Arthur Davis. Scott, recovering first, puffed up his chest. His go-to emotion was aggression. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, taking a step towards Mr. Davis as if to intimidate him. Mr. Davis, a man who regularly negotiated 8-figure deals with ruthless Hollywood producers, didn't so much as blink. He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes, awaiting his cue. "My name is Arthur Davis," he said, his voice calm, yet carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "I'm here for Mr. Leo." He called me Mr. The simple, respectful title was like a foreign language in this house. It seemed to short-circuit my family's entire understanding of my identity. They had only ever known me as Leo, the boy, the brother, the freeloader. "What is this, Leo?" my father asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "What kind of ridiculous stunt are you pulling now?" "It's not a stunt," I said, finally stepping forward from the shadows of the hallway and into the center of the room. I gestured towards the man who had been my mentor, my advocate, and my friend for the past 8 years. "Everyone, this is Mr. Davis. He's my literary agent and the senior editor for my publisher, Blackwood and Finch." Silence. Utter, complete, deafening silence. The words agent, editor, and publisher hung in the air, alien and unbelievable to them. They were concepts from a world they only saw on television, certainly not a world their loser son could possibly inhabit. Jenna let out a nervous, high-pitched laugh. "Your publisher? For what? The angry poems you write in your little diary?" I didn't even grace her with a look. I walked over to the large flat-screen TV in the living room, the one they had all chipped in to buy Scott for Christmas last year. I took the small, encrypted thumb drive from my pocket and plugged it into the USB port. The TV's interface lit up. "What are you doing?" my mother asked, a new note of genuine panic entering her voice. She knew, on some instinctual level, that whatever was on that drive was not in her favor. "Just sharing a little home movie," I said, my voice chillingly calm. I navigated to the video file named Exhibit A and pressed play. The screen flickered to life, showing a crystal-clear, wide-angle shot of my bedroom. My family stared, confused. And then, the door on the screen opened, and Jenna slipped inside. The collective gasp was like the air being sucked out of the room. Jenna's face went white, then a sickly shade of green. She looked from the screen to me, her eyes wide with pure, animal terror. Scott looked at his wife, then back at the screen, a dawning, horrified understanding on his face. My parents were frozen, their mouths slightly agape. We all watched in thick, suffocating silence as the woman on the screen, the perfect, sainted Jenna, moved through my room like a professional. We saw her slip the expensive Tom Ford cologne into her purse. We saw her pocket the new Moleskine journal. We saw her smug, satisfied smile as she gave the room one last scan before slipping out. The video was irrefutable. It was damning. It was the unvarnished truth, playing out in high definition. When the video ended, the screen went black, but the image of her betrayal was seared into the silence of the room, a permanent stain. Jenna began to stammer, fat tears welling in her eyes and rolling down her pale cheeks. "It's not. It wasn't like that. I was cleaning. He's twisting things. He's trying to frame me. Scott turned on her, his face a storm of confusion and betrayal. You told me he was the one making you uncomfortable. You said he was paranoid. He was, she sobbed, clutching at his arm. He has all this expensive stuff, and he's just didn't seem right. I thought I was doing him a favor by taking them, that maybe he would be motivated to get a real job if he didn't have such a crutch to lean on. I did it for us, for our future. Her excuse was so pathetic, so transparently self-serving and utterly nonsensical, that it was almost laughable. But no one was laughing. My parents just stared, their entire worldview crumbling before their eyes. They had built their family narrative on the twin pillars of Jenna's perfection and my failure. And in the space of a 2-minute video, both pillars had been pulverized into dust. The foundation of their world had cracked, but the final catastrophic earthquake was yet to come. For a moment, it looked like my mother might actually faint. She swayed on the sofa, her hand fluttering to her chest. My father, however, found his voice, and it was filled with rage. But his rage, predictably, wasn't directed at the thief who had just been exposed. It was directed at me, the person who had dared to reveal the truth. "How dare you?" he roared, his face turning a deep, apoplectic purple. "You spy on our family? You concoct this elaborate scheme to humiliate this poor girl, your brother's wife, in our own home." "She is a thief," I said, my voice as cold and hard as granite. "And this is not your home." That statement hung in the air, a declaration of war that finally silenced him. "I have had enough of your disrespect," he finally sputtered, taking a menacing step towards me. "You have lived under my roof, eaten my food, for 31 years. This is my house, and you will get out of it now." I didn't move an inch. I just looked at him, at this blustering, impotent man so desperate to cling to a power he had forfeited long ago. "No, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but carrying more weight than his shouts. "It's not." I walked over to the sleek leather briefcase that Mr. Davis had discreetly placed by the door. I clicked it open and took out a thick manila file folder. I walked back to the coffee table and laid it down, turning it so my father could see the cover sheet from the county clerk's office. "This," I said, tapping the paper with my index finger, "is the official registered deed to this house. As you can see, my name is on it, and only my name." My mother scoffed, a brief return of her old fire. "That's ridiculous. Your father and I have owned this house for 40 years. We have the original paperwork in the safe." "You did," I corrected her gently, "until 10 years ago. Do you remember when Scott decided to start that disastrous t-shirt printing business and you needed $60,000 to bail him out of debt? When the bank had already turned you down for a second loan?" Their faces went slack. Their eyes went wide. Oh, they remembered. They remembered every desperate, shameful moment. "Grandpa remembered too," I continued, my voice gaining strength as their defenses crumbled. "He knew you weren't good with money. That's why, in his will, he left the house to me. It was a conditional inheritance. I would only get full title if and when you formally signed it over. And you did. You signed the transfer of ownership agreement. In exchange, I gave you the $60,000 from the inheritance trust my grandfather had set up for me. You bailed Scott out and you signed this house over to me free and clear. You just conveniently forgot about it. Or, more likely, you just didn't think I'd ever have the guts to bring it up." I pulled a second document from the file and slid it across the table. It was the original transfer agreement with their signatures bold and clear at the bottom. Notarized by Mr. Thompson himself. Legal. Binding. Final. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of their universe imploding. It was the sound of a lifetime of lies, entitlement, and willful ignorance being obliterated by 2 pieces of paper. Scott, the golden child, literally sank onto the arm of the sofa, his head in his hands, as if his strings had been cut. Jenna was openly weeping now, not for her betrayal, but for the loss of her prize. My mother looked like she had seen a ghost. And my father just stared at his own signature on the paper, his face a mask of utter, hollow devastation. He had been so busy playing the king in his castle that he never realized he was just a tenant. And his lease had just expired. This is the moment that changed everything, the moment I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You guys are amazing. Do me a huge favor and hit that like button and comment the number 1 down below, just so I know you've been on this journey with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Into that deafening, soul-crushing silence came a new sound. The quiet, professional murmur of voices and the soft tread of footsteps on the porch. At a subtle nod from Mr. Davis, 2 men and a woman in crisp, matching navy blue uniforms entered the house. They were Liam, Sarah, and Mark, the white-glove moving team from a company that specialized in handling fine art and the estates of the wealthy. They moved with a calm, surgical efficiency that was both impressive and, for my family, utterly terrifying. They didn't see a family home filled with memories. They saw a list of assets to be packed and transported. Their deference to me only deepened my family's humiliation. "Sir, should we begin with the office as planned?" Liam asked, his voice a model of quiet respect. "Yes, please," I replied, my own voice steady. "Everything in that room goes. Be careful with the computer equipment and the research files on the shelves." They worked like a well-oiled machine, a blur of motion and purpose. They brought in specialized, acid-free boxes for my extensive library of books, heavily padded crates for my multi-monitor computer setup, and sturdy, rolling wardrobes for my clothes. Each item they carefully packed was another piece of my old life being meticulously excised from the toxic environment where it had struggled to grow. My family remained frozen, pathetic statues in the tragedy they had authored. They were prisoners in a home that was no longer theirs, forced to bear witness as my real life, the successful, independent life they had refused to see, was systematically dismantled and removed from their orbit. Every box that was carried out the front door was a monument to their colossal, life-altering miscalculation. Scott couldn't bring himself to look at me. He just stared at the worn pattern on the carpet. The golden child suddenly realizing his crown was made of cardboard and glitter. Jenna's sobs had subsided into the pathetic, hiccuping sniffles of a spoiled child who had her favorite toy taken away. My mother sat ramrod straight on the sofa, her hands clenched in her lap, looking as if she had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Mr. Davis stood beside me, a silent, reassuring presence. He didn't say a word, but his presence was a constant, solid reminder that I was no longer alone. I had a team, I had allies, I had a life they knew nothing about, and it was a life that was now moving on without them. One of the last items to be removed was a small, unassuming wooden box. It contained my grandfather's photos, his old fountain pen, and a stack of his letters to me from when I was in college. As Liam carried it past my father, our eyes met for a fraction of a second. In his gaze, I saw it all. The shock, the shame, the bitter, impotent resentment. But there was no apology. There was no remorse. There was only the seething rage of a fallen tyrant. And in that moment, any lingering shadow of a doubt I might have had about my decision vanished completely. I had done the right thing, the only thing. When the last box was loaded onto the immaculate moving truck, the house felt cavernous, like a hollowed-out shell. The pale, faded rectangles on the walls where pictures used to hang looked like ghosts. The silence was no longer heavy with tension but echoed with the emptiness of loss. I did one final walkthrough of my empty office. It was just a box now. For walls, a floor, and a ceiling. The life that had been lived there, the worlds that had been created were already packed away, ready to be reborn somewhere new, somewhere clean. As I came down the stairs for the very last time, my mother finally broke her paralysis. She scrambled up from the sofa, her face a mess of tear tracks and desperation, and blocked my path to the door. "Leo, please," she whispered, her voice trembling and raw. "Don't do this. We're your family. You can't just throw us out on the street." For a fleeting second, a flicker of the old me, The boy who would have done anything for a kind word from his mother surfaced. It was a ghost of a feeling, a phantom limb of longing. But it was quickly and decisively extinguished by the man I had been forced to become. "Family?" I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I looked her straight in the eye. "Family doesn't do what you did. Family doesn't plot behind their son's back to take his home. Family doesn't stand by silently while one child emotionally and verbally abuses the other. You stopped being my family the moment you decided my worth was less than your own comfort and convenience." "But where will we go?" she cried, her composure finally shattering as she grabbed my arm. "What will we do? Your father and I? We have nothing." I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. "That is no longer my concern. You made your choice years ago, and you confirmed it today. You chose your side. You chose him." I nodded towards Scott, who still hadn't moved. "You made your bed. The four of you. Now you have to lie in it together." I looked past her to the rest of them. My father was still staring at the legal papers, as if hoping they would spontaneously combust. Scott was staring at the floor, the picture of defeat. Jenna was staring at me, a desperate, pleading look in her eyes that I no longer had any response to. "I am selling the house," I stated, my voice ringing with an absolute finality in the empty room. "A realtor will be in contact with you tomorrow to arrange a time to take photos. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. After 30 days, any items left in this house will be considered abandoned and will be disposed of." I pulled out my new set of keys, the keys to a downtown apartment I had leased weeks ago in anticipation of this exact moment. "Don't try to contact me," I said, my voice as hard and unforgiving as steel. "Don't call. Don't email. Don't show up at my new address. This chapter of my life is over." I walked towards the door. Mr. Davis held it open for me. I stepped out into the bright afternoon sun, took a deep breath of clean, free air, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly, profoundly free. I didn't look back. There was nothing left in that house to look back for. The past was a house of ghosts, and I was finally walking away. 6 months. It's a cliché, but it's amazing how a life can completely transform in just 6 months. The ghost who had haunted the halls of his childhood home was gone, replaced by a man I was only just starting to get to know, a man I was starting to like. I moved into a sleek, modern apartment in a downtown high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panorama of the city skyline. The silence here was a different entity altogether. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of my old home, thick with unspoken resentments. This was a peaceful, creative silence, a blank canvas that I could fill with my own thoughts, my own music, my own life. Freed from the suffocating negativity of my family, my career didn't just flourish. It exploded. The book I had been finishing during all that turmoil, a dark family saga ironically titled The House of Whispers, was released to a chorus of critical acclaim. It hit the New York Times bestseller list in its first week and stayed there for the next 10. My publisher had already offered me a new multi-book deal with a life-changing advance. My promotion in the literary world was the ultimate personal vindication. Tonight was the official launch party and book signing at a large, historic bookstore downtown. The line of people waiting to get their books signed snaked around the aisles, a living testament to a reality my family could never have conceived of. These people weren't family, but they felt more like a tribe than my own blood relatives ever had. They had connected with my words, with the worlds I created. My best friend, Mark, was leaning against a bookshelf nearby, a ridiculously proud grin plastered on his face. He had been my rock through the entire ordeal. "Look at you, man," he said, shaking his head in mock disbelief as he handed me a bottle of water. "Big shot author, hobnobbing with the literary elite. Who would have thought?" "You did," I said, looking up from the book I was signing and meeting his eyes. "You were the only one for a long time." "Yeah, well, I'm a genius at spotting talent," he quipped. "But seriously, Leo, look at you. You seem lighter. You're happy." He was right. It was a strange, new sensation, one I was still getting used to. It wasn't the loud, performative happiness my brother always projected. It was a quiet, solid contentment that emanated from my core. It was the deep, abiding peace that comes from knowing your own worth, from building a life on your own terms, from your own blueprints. As I was signing a book for a young woman, she looked at me with sincere, earnest eyes. "Your main character," she said. "The way he had to cut off his toxic family to save himself. That really spoke to me. It gave me courage." "Thank you." Her words hit me harder than any review or sales figure. In that moment, I understood that the pain I had endured wasn't pointless. I had managed to forge it into something that could help someone else feel less alone. The manager of the bookstore, a kind woman named Mrs. Peterson, came over to check on me. "The response has been just incredible, Mr. Leo," she said, beaming. "Your story is truly resonating with people. We've sold out twice already." Mr. Leo. I was still getting used to that. As I signed the last book of the night and thanked the enthusiastic crowd, I felt a sense of profound, overwhelming gratitude. I had lost a family, yes, but I had found a community. I had lost their approval, but I had found my voice. I had lost their love, but I had found myself. The life they had relentlessly told me I was incapable of living was now my vibrant reality. And as I looked out at the sea of friendly, smiling faces, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I had made the right choice. I had chosen myself, and that had made all the difference. Just as the event was winding down and the last of the guests were trickling out, a figure at the back of the now empty room caught my eye. She was standing in the shadows of a bookshelf, looking hesitant, small, and utterly out of place. It took me a second to penetrate the fog of memory and recognize her. It was Jenna, but this was a version of Jenna I had never seen before. The designer clothes, the perfect hair, the confident, entitled posture. All of it was gone. She was wearing a simple, worn-out sweater and jeans. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was pale, thin, and etched with lines of worry. The polished, condescending woman who had tried to ruin my life had been replaced by a frayed, desperate-looking ghost. Mark saw her too, and his friendly expression immediately hardened into a protective scowl. "What is she doing here?" he muttered, moving to stand closer to me, a silent bodyguard. Jenna saw us looking and took a tentative, faltering step forward into the light. "Leo?" she called out, her voice thin and reedy, a pale imitation of its former confident chirp. I took a deep breath, my heart giving a single hard thump against my ribs. I had played this scenario out in my head 100 times, imagining what I would say, what I would do, and now here it was in the flesh. "Jenna," I said, my voice perfectly neutral, giving nothing away. She walked closer, twisting the strap of her cheap-looking purse in her hands. "I saw you on the local news," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "About the book. It's a huge success. Congratulations. I'm really happy for you. Why are you here?" I asked, cutting through the pleasantries. I had no more time for games. Tears, the weapon she had once wielded with such expertise, welled in her eyes. But this time they didn't look calculated. They looked real. They looked like the product of genuine misery. "I came to apologize," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What I did to you, it was horrible. I was horrible. There's no excuse. I was jealous of you, Leo. Scott always got everything handed to him, but my parents always struggled for every penny. When I saw you, with your nice things, seemingly not having to work a real job, I resented it, and I was cruel and petty. I am so sorry." I listened, a silent, impassive judge. "Things have been really hard," she continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "After you sold the house, we had nowhere to go. We're all crammed into a tiny, run-down 2-bedroom apartment. Scott, he lost his job. His company had layoffs, and his sales numbers were terrible. He couldn't handle the stress. He's not the man I thought he was. There's even been talk of divorce. And your parents, their health isn't good. The stress has been too much." She took another step closer, her eyes finally locking on mine, and they were filled with a raw, desperate plea. Leo, we're broke. We're months behind on rent and about to be evicted. I know I have no right to ask you for anything. Ever. But could you help us? Alone? Just enough to get back on our feet. And then, in her desperation, she let the final, ugly, pathetic truth slip out. They were so desperate. She sobbed, her face crumbling. That's why they did it. That's why they were so determined to get the house. They were drowning in debt. Credit cards, a second mortgage they never told you about. My parents even gave them money for my grandmother's funeral last year because they were so broke. They thought the house was their only way out, their only safety net. It wasn't just about Scott. It was about the money. They were going to lose everything. There it was, the final, sordid piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just about favoritism. It was about pure, pathetic, financial desperation. They weren't just trying to house their golden child. They were trying to cash in on my grandfather's legacy to pay for their own decades of irresponsibility. I looked at this broken woman in front of me and I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel the satisfaction of victory. I just felt nothing. Profound, empty nothingness. They were characters in a book I had already finished writing, and I had long since typed the end. I reached into my wallet, took out all the cash I had on me. It was about $500, and held it out to her. Here, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Take this. Buy some groceries. But this is the last time. This is not forgiveness. This is closure. Forgiveness doesn't mean I have to go back to the hell you all created for me. I hope you figure things out, Jenna. I truly do. But my life is my own now. You are not my responsibility. She took the money, her hands shaking. Thank you, she whispered. She turned without another word and walked away, disappearing into the city night like the ghost she had become. Mark put a hand on my shoulder. You okay, man? I nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, feeling a weight I didn't even know I was still carrying finally lift and float away. Yeah, I said, and I meant it. I think I am. Later that night, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in my apartment, looking out at the endless river of lights that was the city. The chaos of the day, the successful book launch, the confrontation with Jenna, had settled, leaving a quiet, contemplative stillness in its wake. Jenna's visit had been the final echo from a world I no longer inhabited. Her confession didn't change what they had done, but it colored it in a new, pathetic shade of desperation. They hadn't just been cruel. They had been weak, and their weakness had festered, turning them into monsters of their own making. It was a sad, sordid end to a sad, sordid story. I thought about the word family. For most of my life, I believed it was an unbreakable bond, a non-negotiable part of my identity. I thought it meant I had to endure, to forgive, to accept, no matter the cost to my own sanity and self-worth. I was wrong. Family isn't just about blood or a shared last name. It's about respect. It's about support. It's about seeing someone for who they truly are and loving them not in spite of their flaws, but because you understand them. It's a verb and action, a choice you make every day. My parents and my brother had been my relatives, but they had not been my family. Not in any way that truly mattered. My real family was Mark, who had been my unwavering champion when no one else was. It was Mr. Davis, who saw my talent and fought for it as if it were his own. It was the readers, like the young woman at the bookstore, who found a piece of themselves in my stories and reached out to connect. I hadn't lost a family. I had escaped a prison and was finally free to build a real one, based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Mark. Celebratory drinks this weekend, big shot author? My treat. You've earned it. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I typed back a simple reply. You're on. I put the phone down and looked back out at the glittering city. The future was no longer a scary, unknown territory. It was a blank page, a fresh manuscript, and for the first time in my life I was the only one holding the pen. And I couldn't wait to write the next chapter. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I truly hope it resonated with you in some way. It's a vulnerable thing to share, but I believe in the power of stories to connect us. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose yourself over the expectations of your family? I'd be honored if you'd share your own experiences or thoughts in the comments below. And of course, if you'd like to hear more, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. Your support means the world.